organization I'm involved in. Basically, I'm your local Baptist missionary. And I thank you for your love and walk with me. You are one of 51 churches, soon to be 52 churches, that collaborate together from Sunnyside to East Point back towards the interstate. We're in 4 counties, 2 time zones. My 49 buddies or collaborators around the state, my colleagues around the state, they feel bad for me because I have one of the largest geographical areas in the state. They've just never been with me driving on Sunday morning along the beach or back into the woods or seeing the people I get to see. So they don't know how blessed I am to be where I am. And my family's been here for 7 years. And we're about encouraging, equipping, and engaging our network of churches to win our communities for Christ. That's basically what we're about. But I'm not the only missionary in the room today. You're all missionaries if you're a believer in Christ. And I invite you to join me on that missionary journey. Speaking of journeys, that's what I find when I look at the 28th chapter, and I'm reading from the Holman Christian Standard Bible, but follow what you have. When I turn to verse 10, it's hard for me to get past those first 3 words. Jacob left Beersheba. As I studied that passage, a thought came to me of a vacation trip I had years and years ago. Just had one girl at the time. We're blessed with 2. But on our way back, we were cutting through Alabama along close to Cheaha Mountain. And I'm still old school with atlases. I used GPS some. I didn't have any choice back in those days. An atlas was all you had. But I'd love to travel over the world from my easy chair with an atlas. And so I had the atlas. I carried my vehicle. And I was looking at routes. And you know, those green dotted lines always jump up at me. Those are the scenic routes. I'm the only one in my family that enjoys the scenic routes, but it doesn't matter if I'm behind the wheel. They're just going to have to love it. And so we're taking this green dotted line scenic route close to Cheaha Mountain, and we leave the 4-lane highway, and we get on the 2-lane hard road, and pretty soon it's gravel, and after a while it's a red clay road, and it winds up at the end of 2 barriers with 2 construction workers leaning against it eating a bologna sandwich. And so I get out and I say, is this State Road so-and-so? They said, yeah. And I pointed at the map, is this the road I'm on? They said, oh, yeah. I said, can I go any further? They said, we wouldn't have advised that. They're dynamiting about 2 miles down the road. I said, well, how come the map says there's a road, but the road's not built yet? He said, I guess it's because it's quicker to draw them than it is to build them. So I got back in my car, back on the red clay road, back on the gravel road, back on the hard road, back to the corner of what were you thinking? And I told you so. Have you had a journey like that? I bet you have. I bet you have. And they still can be enjoyable. Sometimes they're not, but they're certainly unexpected. You didn't plan to go that way, or you didn't plan the road to end the way it did, or the trip to go the way it did. There are other unexpected journeys I'm sure we've all had. You've heard of people, or have you yourself been to the doctor's office and was told something you didn't expect, and that started the road of an unexpected journey? That was your unexpected beginning. Or your financial advisor or planner share with you information you weren't expecting, that you had more days at the end of the month than you had money. That's an unexpected journey. Or your relationship with your children or someone in your family that you knew was solid turns out to have some cracks in it that you weren't expecting. Now, there can be good unexpected journeys too. I had a daughter last week that called and said she was awarded a scholarship she wasn't expecting, and we were thankful about that, and that was unexpected. Or there's those things that get in your way, like happened to my wife Latriva about 45, a little over 45 minutes ago. She was on her way here, and had a little fender bender, so she's all right. Pray for her, but I guess the Lord just felt like I needed one more illustration of an unexpected journey today. And we'll be going through this sermon when I get back home, I assure you. But unexpected beginnings. You don't plan to go where you went. And Jacob was the same way. He had no plans, no desire to go to Beersheba. His desire was to stay right where, to leave Beersheba. He had no desire to leave Beersheba, to go to Haran. His desire was to stay right there. He had it all set up. He had arranged, connived, tricked, or you could say had a brother that didn't appreciate his birthright. However you want to look at it, he wound up being recognized as the elder son of his family. Had a birthright, which meant that he was going to be the next CEO of the family business. It meant for every share that someone got from his father, he would get an additional share too. He was going to be set for the rest of his life with a lot of power, status, prestige, and a nice enterprise to look over that Isaac had built up. You know, Jacob and Esau had been quarreling, squabbling, struggling ever since the womb. The scriptures tells us that they were struggling inside the womb, and although Esau came out first, hanging onto his heel was Jacob. And Esau was more of daddy's boy. Jacob was more of mama's boy. Esau loved being out in the open, and after a trip out, he came back in, and I'm sure felt like he was going to starve to death. And you know the story from chapters 25, 27. There's Jacob. He was a culinary specialist at the time, really good with stew. And he had a nice big kettle of it. And wow, it was perfect for Esau. Because you know, without a McDonald's or Applebee's or something close by, that was the closest thing you can get to it. And it was ready right then, hot and ready. And so he couldn't help but want some. And Jacob couldn't help himself and tie a string to that and say, you can have some if you give me your birthright. Well, I'd say both boys are at fault. There's Jacob. It looks like he's swindling Esau, but Esau didn't think too much of that birthright, did he? For something so prestigious and honorable and sacred, he didn't think much of it to just let a bowl of porridge take it away from him. And we wonder, why did Isaac, Isaac was blind. He couldn't tell he gave a blessing to Jacob and that he gave the birthright to Jacob, but why did he just take it back? And we don't understand that because our word isn't our bond like it was in the Old Testament. When you spoke something, it was as if you spoke it into existence from God creating the world on down. And so it was a great value. That was your contract. So once you spoke it, you couldn't take it back, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that alone. And so Isaac couldn't take it back. He could give a little bit of a second place prize to Esau, but that was it. And so here Jacob is set. What was the game changer there? Well, a game changer was Rebekah, his mother over here in Esau, said, all right, I'm going to be a good fella while daddy's alive. But as soon as he's dead, there's going to be another death. And I'm going to get that birthright back. And he was talking about, he was so angry, he's talking about killing his brother over that. And his mother was so concerned at that rage, that pent-up rage, that she prepared Jacob for that and said, you're going to need to be gone for a few days till Esau calms down. I have Uncle Laban over in Haran. He'll be good to you. No, you never met him, but he'll take care of you. It'll be all right. Come back in a couple of days. Not realizing it would be 20 years before Jacob could return. So here we are. Jacob left Beersheba. He's on his own. All of his plans, all of his dreams have been turned upside down, or at least delayed. He was not in control of his future as he thought maybe he was. And he's on this unexpected journey in the middle of nowhere. In fact, you'll find in the verses following that this was so unexpected he didn't have time to grab his pillow when he left. He used a stone for his pillow that night. He must have been so tired from both traveling and from just the concern of what happens next that he was out. But an unexpected journey led to an unexpected encounter. And like most of us, when we think there's certain things we need to make us happy, or we think we know what the essentials, when those things that we call essentials are taken away from us, it's only then that we really get introduced to what really is essential. See, Jacob had his mind blocked by a lot of things, but it wasn't until he had some things taken away from him that he could really see God and have an honest conversation with him. I know when I moved here 7 years ago, I was a little bit like that. I left a nice role, and listen, I'm in the coolest gig I've ever been in. Something different every day. Get to work with a lot of different people. I love what I do, but it was not what I expected to do. Every pastor, and I'd pastored for a number of years. Every pastor thinks the role I have now is a dead-end job that you go to as you're getting old and you're graying and pot-bellied and just seeking out retirement. And, of course, I told my kids when I got this position that the trend's changing. But they introduced me to a mirror and said, Dad, look at the mirror. The trend's not changing as fast as you thought it was. But it is what you let it be, and I love it, but it wasn't what I was intending to be or to do. And I came here at the beginning of a really bad housing market to where I couldn't move my house. It took me 2 years. First year, I traveled back and forth, 5 days here, 2 days with family. And then the second year, we lived in a place that was half the size of what we had. And we had 3 bedrooms, but with my wife and 2 daughters and a dog was even a girl, so I was really outnumbered. We just had 1 bathroom, and when I say that, people go, oh my goodness, And I know larger families that deal with that, but yeah, you start wondering little things like that. My goodness, what am I having to give up? And then you start realizing when you're doing with things that you used to rely on, you give up. What it causes you to realize is essential. Because although I was away from my family more, because of the rigors of ministry, there are days when I was in Lake City that I would leave before the kids got up and got home after they went to bed. So I was having more time with them on the weekends with this role. And when we got together in that little house, we realized there's some good things about that. Number one, you couldn't run and hide if you had a fight. You had to just stay there and fight. There was no place to go. You used to dishwashers, and so now you're washing your own dishes, and we'd have humorous moments like, y'all know what a dish drainer is? Okay, and I didn't see many a younger crowd nod their heads, but because you're used to automatic dishwashers too. But we're in Walmart, tell my girls, look, grab me a dish drainer, and they stand right beside it. They don't know what one looks like. They've never had to wash dishes. Or rabbit ears on a TV. I grew up with 3 channels, and you had to hold your leg the right way, your mouth the right way to get one. And my girls were introduced to that. And they couldn't wait for me to get home because I had the only laptop in the family. And so they're at the door waiting me to come home. I didn't care why it was, just the fact they did. It's just that our life got simpler and the Lord got plainer when that happened. Jacob was experiencing this in this encounter, that what he thought was essential, what he thought he'd die if he didn't have it the way he thought he had to have it. He's been introduced to an encounter far beyond what he ever dreamed. And we see that encounter beginning in verse 13. He's having this dream, angels going up and down from heaven. And the Lord was standing there beside him in verse 13 saying, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give, and he goes with several promises that I'll get into in just a second. But he's having this encounter. Never dreamed an encounter with God in the middle of nowhere. It's interesting how things can blur our eyesight with God's presence. Usually it takes 2 things, either fear or pride. Working with people, and especially with churches, I find that to be very true. If a church is afraid they're going to have to close their doors, they're not focused on the Lord anymore. They're focused on the fear of what might happen now things are out of their control. And fear is a natural response, but it still is something that takes our eyes away from an encounter with God that we've said we'll give everything for and do everything for. And then fear starts taking that way. Now I work with churches that things are going and blowing and doing fantastic, but sometimes pride can get in the way of that. To where you begin to think, you drink the Kool-Aid and think, hey, look what we've done. Look at the kingdom we've built. And that's just as disastrous as fear taking your eyes off of the Lord. So Esau, I'm sure, battling between fear and pride, being basically thrown out of his own home and the fear of what's next, and his pride being hurt by that, is getting an encounter with God in a very unexpected place because things are taken away from him where he could see. And here are the promises that the Lord makes to him. In the end of verse 13, I will give you and your offspring the land that you are now sleeping on. Here he thought he lost. He's thinking everything he lost, God's sharing him everything he's about to gain. God has promised him a place. A place. Some poll, I want to say it's Gallup poll years ago, asked people to submit what are the top 3-word phrases you most want to hear. And most people said, I love you is the phrase they most want to hear. And that's understandable in our world. And with the brokenness of our world, it's understandable why people said number 2 was, I forgive you. They long to hear the words, I forgive you, over some hurt or wound. But what surprised them was number 3, and it came in different forms, but basically the third most mentioned phrase was, it's dinner time. Now, you're not surprised by that because of the hour it is. But let me tell you where they were going with this. And many of you have moved away from where you were raised. And a number of you have people come at holiday time, Christmas, Thanksgiving, another time. But you know the value of the table. When you think about going home, what does going home mean? Usually you mean the table. Not just the good food that your favorites that you remember growing up, but the conversation that went around that table. We're losing that table. And so that's why we long for that table, where at least one time a day, you're going to be united with your loved ones, sharing what's going on, sharing your affirmation and your hurts. And people long for that because we don't have that anymore. The neat thing is, even though people say that the church is going on a downward spiral, that things are changing, this will never change. Those people, our world's 3 main desires, and the fact that the Lord Jesus Christ is the most eternal and best answer to every one of those needs. I love you, I forgive you, and I have a place for you. And here is Jacob. He's homeless, basically, and he hears the Lord tell him, I have a place for you. Now he looks around, his head's on this rock, and he doesn't see anything there. Gee is not, much to look at right now. But the fact that he had a place meant all the world for him when he was displaced from what his dreams had been. Look at the next promise of potential. He said that your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out toward the west, the east, the north, and the south. One guy being told, you have awesome potential. We need to put ourselves in the place of Jacob more often because we cut ourselves down way too much. And let me tell you, you can cut yourself down all you want to and say, I'm not much use to the Lord because of my history, my past, my lack of training, so on and so forth. Let me remind you who some of the biggest characters in Scripture were. Moses, who needed a GPS worse than anybody else in this world. Gideon, the worst case of yellow streak in his back that any commander of an army could ever have. And Peter, the worst backbiter any staff could have. And yet God took those 3 people and in spite of themselves, used them for His glory, because there's no way you can say Moses, Gideon, and Peter did what they did. God used them and worked through them. It's not about competency. It's about surrender. And so here is Jacob by himself. And he says, you've got potential. I'd rather have the Lord do that than any of us do. I'm glad that commercial about Pinocchio being a motivational speaker, I'm glad that doesn't happen because I just see Pinocchio coming to me and say, you've got potential, and his nose growing 10 feet long. But Jesus' nose doesn't grow when He tells you that because He can see where we can't see, and what He's seeing is, man, you're going to love this journey. Now, it's not the way you would do it, and it's not the route that you would pick. But you're going to love this journey if you love me enough to trust me on this journey. And Jacob later becomes Israel after wrestling with God at the same place later. And everybody knows the name Israel today. And through so many centuries and so many ups and downs and bigger nations living around them, everybody wanting to wipe them out, guess who's still around? Israel. God kept his promise. He also gave a promise of power. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. You will impact everybody. Your legacy will touch everybody. Not just Beersheba. Your dreams are too low to think that Beersheba was the big answer. I'm giving you something beyond just Beersheba. And then the promise of presence. Look, I'm with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I've done what I promised you. To know he's with us wherever. And for Jacob to worry about what he left, he's having God promise him, I'll be with you where you left and where you're coming back to, and where you don't even know where you're going, I'll be with you. That is awesome. What's more awesome than that? You don't have to be Jacob to get those promises. Just willing to accept God's word as true and accept his presence into his life. That's the unexpected encounter. He couldn't have gotten that in Beersheba because there's too much of his own self wrapped around Beersheba. But when God got him away from Beersheba, where he had nothing else to distract him from God's presence, when he basically had nothing that he considered essential, God showed him what was essential and the blessings that were in that. And so we come to the unexpected commitment. In verse 20, Jacob made a vow in response to all this. If God will be with me and watch over me on this journey, if he provides me with food to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. Now, I inadvertently included in your listening notes 2 phrases of commitment, and that was my error, but I think it was God, blessings to God. This is the most underemphasized part of this passage, is our response to that, our commitment to that. Now, I have to say, I wasn't all that happy with this commitment for a long time. Too many ifs in it for my blood. You know, you ever signed a contract and said, you'll get this if. Doesn't sound very promising. A lot of hedging in that. Sounds like one of those, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And although a lot of people want that, it's not biblical. Jesus wasn't that way. He gave us what we didn't deserve, and he prevented us from having what we do deserve. That's not scratch your back. That's grace and mercy. We're about give me grace and everybody else justice. And that's my wife's favorite phrase. I have to give Latriva a footnote for that. Give everybody else justice but me grace. But Christ is about grace. And so how does that square? It squares in this way. There's more than one way to look at the ifs. And it's not an if of just the condition of, if all this goes my way, Lord, I'm on board. But it's providing that. Understand, Mary's processing all this. All this has come to him unexpectedly. Said, providing that, wow, you're the God that is ever present with me, is going to give me a place, loves me, forgives me, the potential involved, the power involved, realizing that you're a God, providing that you're a God like that. I'd be crazy not to sign in with a God like that. I'd be foolish not to respond to a God like that. That was what Jacob was saying. And so in spite of all of his foolishness to that point, anything he'd done in the past that he considered a mistake and might have worried him would have been a shallow, small mistake compared to the mistake of passing up God's offer to be present with you. And some of us here have low self-esteems because God forgave us, everybody else forgave us except ourselves. We're the hardest to forgive ourselves on something in the past. But God is saying, if you think that was a mistake, whatever that mistake is, it pales in comparison to the mistake of let God's presence pass you by. To think that you've lost it all when maybe it's the beginning of an unexpected journey. this morning, we want to give you that start. Whatever that hurt is, that pain, whatever it is you lost, or wherever you thought you gained, but you don't know the value of God's presence. Today would be a wonderful day to start that journey. In just a moment, we'll have that opportunity on our invitation to do that as we go to the Lord, asking Him to make these words come alive in our life. Father, thank you